Hello and welcome to Upper Pen. My name is Dakota, and today I am talking with Hannah Kaner about her book, Godkiller. Thank you so much for being here, Hannah.
Thank you so much for having us, Dakota. It's lovely to meet you.
Um, so, what is Godkiller about?
So Godkiller is, it does what it says on the tin. It's about a woman who kills gods for a living. So I thought, as titles come and go, like I'm terrible at titles, but this one is stuck from the beginning because yeah, it's about a woman who kills gods for a living until she finds a god that she cannot kill, which is a little god of white lies called Skedi, who is attached to a young noble girl on the run. So the god killer, Kissen, sort of needs to try and separate them. So she takes them on a quest to get them to separate, so she can kill the god and save the girl. But on the way, they run into a knight errant who has a quest and a secret mission of his own. And the secrets of that kind of like reveal a lot more about the world than what's going on within it.
So, I was like pretty sure it was just going to follow Kissen the whole time, and then it broke up into different perspectives, and I was like, this is so much better. Oh my gosh.
I did write it from Kissen's perspective. Well, I started writing it from Kissen's perspective. I tried like bit of first person, bit of third person. Like Kissen's voice was really, really strong is where I started. But it just felt like it wasn't enough. It's been pitched before as like The Witcher meets American Gods, which I absolutely love. I've not read The Witcher, but I really should. And I love that kind of like narrative that follows sort of an individual on a quest. But as I started like building out this sort of quest and this sort of fellowship within it, I just all the other voices felt like they needed to be there because they had a different interpretation of the world and of faith and of gods. So it felt like just one perspective just wasn't going to be enough.
I I really do agree, especially Skedi, the god of white lies, because he has such a different perspective from everybody else. And like I don't think it would have come across quite right
Mm.
without him.
Yeah, I think it would have really, he wouldn't have had agency, I think. And he is a character whose agency is disruptive, but is really interesting because, he just wants to live in a world where gods are banned, and shouldn't be such a difficult thing for him to do. So he's quite self-focused, and he has like kind of his own benefits at his heart, with some kind of softness for his companion. But yeah, I felt that without his voice, we would have. Kissen's voice is really angry and like kind of very against gods, and she hates them, and that's kind of what she's built her life around, and comes from a really valuable and important place. But each perspective is a different version. You've got Inara, who's fresh to the world and sort of believes gods. She's connected to one, and one's been her companion all her life. She thinks, yeah, they should deserve to survive. Got Skedi, who would quite like to remain alive, like as a general rule. And then we have Elo, who has seen the worst of what gods can do, but believes that faith should be a matter of an individual's choice. And freedom of faith is really important to him, so much so that he's almost sacrificed his entire career in order to sort of stand on that ground. So it felt like actually that's a much more interesting way of looking at the world is through those different perspectives rather than just taking one and done.
I really like Elo's storyline because he starts off as a baker, kind of. um, and it's such a silly, like, oh, he used to be a soldier slash knight, and now he just bakes and tries to avoid everything. Um, and it's just funny because he's like, this isn't really working at all.
He's trying so hard. I think a lot of people with Elo are just like the poor man just needs a break. Um, but yeah, it was really interesting because I wanted to sort of explore this, like, what does a knight do when he stops being a knight? Like, kind of, especially when it's done out of honor. And he's basically gone and like stuck his head in the sand. He has other opportunities, like he's got his parents, his mothers, or he's got his friend and like a reputation that he could sort of lean on. But he kind of wants to move into a more peaceable place to deal with his trauma, and also to avoid getting involved in anything like taking a stance. And that's a terrible idea. Like you can't just hide from the world and expect it to forget about you. And so yeah, and so I had that kind of idea in my head. I knew I wanted a knight. I knew I wanted him to have stopped being a knight. And then but I was trying to figure out like what does he do? Become a mercenary? You know, he's got like kind of a profession in that area, but he sort of wants to be peaceable, so it's not really quite the direction he can go in. So I was actually in on holidays with some friends in north of Scotland in Dunoon. It's actually west of Scotland, which is where I live. And my friend Yemi spent about 3 days like baking bread for everyone. So he like kind of made like 3 loaves of focaccia for 7 people. So it was enough bread to last like a week, and we were there for 3 days. And I was just there, like kind of watching this, like my friend just like absolutely go to town on baking bread, and I was like, that's what he can do. He could be a baker. That's so cool. Like it's so productive. It's really generous, like occupation to have, and it also kind of yeah, just felt really delightful. Also, I love eating, so it made me allowed me to talk about food.
It did make me want to make so much focaccia though. I was like, oh, oh, so good. Flaky salt on top.
A little bit of salt, a little bit of herbs. Absolutely, yeah.
um, there's a scene with him and one of the other pilgrims because they're going on this journey to the city of the gods that
Yes, the lost city of the gods, city of a
yes.
thousand shrines.
But there's a moment in the very beginning, right when he's meeting the other pilgrims and he gets offered a dumpling and he's like,
Yeah.
oh, it looks so good. Oh.
The thing is, yeah, he's like, yeah, the flavor is good, but the dough, it's sticky. Like, you need to deal with that. And there's a thing about bread as well, is that there's so many different cultures who have their own versions of what bread is and what dumplings are as well. And I love that they're kind of almost not universal, like kind of, but just so many different interpretations of like food in stuff, food layered on stuff, food given, food shared. And so I loved that kind of like sharing of the food, and then Elo being like, "This is the one thing I built my life around, and you've done it badly." and
But
and
he
he
tries
can't
to be
keep
so
that in.
nice.
Like at the worst possible moment, he's like, "I need to tell you how to do this better." He's really proud. He's a really proud character. So he's like, kind of, if this is going to be the thing that I do, I'm going to be good at it, and I'm also going to be really judgy about other people who do it badly.
I just loved he started making bread as soon as they started making camp. Like, this is just watch. Just please watch for next time.
Watch and learn.
So this book is pretty heavy. Like the prologue starts with a fire sacrifice, but you have these moments of levity that I think work so very well. So like that's so good. Thanks.
I really I really love those moments in books, like kind of, and in films as well, where you've suddenly the characters have sort of space to be and to connect. And I think kind of something that's really quintessential to fantasy is that idea of like fellowship, and especially if you're on a quest and you're moving through different lands, and that kind of sensation of, well, we are thrown together and we have to deal with each other now. And what brings people together better than food and warmth and sharing of stories? And I think that's such like an origin of fantasy and our storytelling is traders around a campfire. And I think that's something that kind of always is in my heart as like a really special thing. So I mean, for me, sort of food around a dinner table is like when that's how my family gets together. That's how we like engage. It's where we talk the most is fire, food, and wine. And I just that is such an important thing in fantasy. It's such an important thing in storytelling and community building. And so I love those elements of peace in a quest. I think some people find them a bit slow or not much is happening, but for me, it's like that's the heart of it.
Well, I feel like you really get to like the characters' true personalities in those moments, not just the front that they're trying to put up, right?
Yes, exactly.
And then we have Kissen, who will just snark her way through everything. Uh, so she is hilarious in her own way because her snark is very biting but very funny. Um, and I love her dynamic with Inara because they're just like Inara's never seen anybody like this. And Kissen's like, I do not want to deal with you, like at all.
I just cannot right now. I, I think like one of my favorite parts about Kissen is that she's really brittle on the outside and she lives in her style. That's how she is with her family, that's how she is with her friends. Like it's kind of her way of probing at people. And also giving them a sense of like kind of banter and repartee. Like she thinks that's how you get to the heart of someone. But she's also like really soft-hearted. Like she has like a lot of she really cares about people and she thinks that people should have a right to exist and a right to exist kind of happily. And there's a lot of her that she had a terrible like the fire sacrifice at the beginning of how she sort of came into this sort of role of killing gods and why she hates gods. Um she doesn't believe that anyone should have to suffer. She did. And so for her, like she will reach out a hand to people who need help. She is actually really, really soft, but she's also kind of like she's got her claws out all the time. And I find that really engaging. I think it's really funny.
She is very funny, especially there's a scene where she's flirting with the bartender in the very first town, Rosalie, and then she's like, "Oh, okay, we just started a fight. I guess we can leave. I'm sorry."
Yeah, she's like, right, fine, I'm out of here. She's kind of had to deal with a lot of ostracism, so she's like, I don't want to cause you trouble. I can sort myself out, bye. But she's
Yeah.
always gutted. It kind of comes back, they've written book two now, it comes back a bit in book two. She's like, what if I just had a nice time with that barkeep and had a nice roll around and didn't have to deal with this little child and her little god and everything going tits up.
So, speaking of book two, I am so excited for it because of the way you ended book one. I know it's written as like a self-contained book, but oh my gosh, do I just want more at the end. I'm like, there's more here. I know it.
Yeah, I mean, I actually envisaged it as a duology, kind of like a there and back again story. But when the publisher wanted three books, it was such a wonderful thing because it meant I could go further, I could explore more, I could make this world bigger, or just reveal more of it to the reader. And yeah, book two has been difficult, and people have sort of asked, you know, what's the premise of book two? And said, I suppose if book one is A New Hope, then book two is The Empire Strikes Back. So stay tuned.
That's a perfect analogy.
But
Um,
yeah.
so that kind of brings up the fact that Elo's companion, like his best friend, is the king who should not have been king. Um,
Watch out for spoilers.
I know it's very hard, and now I'm like, come on, I don't know how to talk about parts of this because it's so layered. You layered it so well. um,
Elo's relationship with the king is so interesting because it's a relationship formed out of like many years of companionship and like friendship and a deep abiding love. And that's not to be lost so easily. But then the king has also moved down a route that Elo doesn't agree with and, you know, step back from. And he has to be kind of confronted with that idea of in this book and in the next one is like, how far should I have stepped back and how far should I've leaned in and stopped this going down the route that it has gone? So I think that's kind of introduced that right at the beginning is that they do have a difference of opinion over how the world should be. And Elo's choice is whether to take action or to sit back. And he had chosen the latter originally. And as it comes through book one, he's going to have to choose the former and take action.
yeah,
And
and
definitely in book two.
he really does step up in book one. He's realizes his mistake pretty quickly once he's out in the world again. Um, but the king is he reminds me of like a child or like one of those boys that never quite grew up
Yeah, that's
because
a really good way of putting it.
well he sneaks away from his guards to go visit Elo, the baker, who does not really, I don't know, he doesn't want to see the king very much, but like he's not going to say no.
Yeah, exactly. It's quite an imposition of him kind of like just turning up at his door, being like, "Hey, your best friend's back."
Yeah.
Which is, no spoilers, that's right at the beginning of their first meeting. And so yeah, I love that kind of tangled dynamic and the love that endures, but also the kind of the pain that's going to be there as well. And they've both experienced a war together and sort of came very close to destruction of this country's way of life, of its entire monarchy. And the king is kind of, yeah, the king, as he said, who wasn't supposed to be king. He is the least loved and least like important of the queen's children. And he, so his sort of kingship has come kind of as an accident. And he managed to win a war and is trying to enact and control that power of, this country. He's banned all the gods from his country. It's lost its entire monarchy. It's lost one of its most important cities. So how does he retain that power and how does he keep it? And I think that's not a simple answer to that question. So
No,
I hope people have some sympathy for him and yeah, as well as frustration.
I think every character here is I'm very sympathetic towards, but also I want to just shake a little. Like,
Yeah,
hey man.
absolutely. Yeah, I think it's really fun when you read a book and you're like, you can see people making the wrong decisions and you're like, don't do that. When I'm writing it like, don't do that. That's about it. Oh no. Oh, you did the thing. Oh dear. Now I'm gonna have to get you out of that
Eventually.
eventually. I think that's sometimes the hardest thing to write because definitely when I first started out writing when I was younger, there was such a desire to write characters who are to an extent just good and perfect and fine. And I don't make the wrong choices, just the world is bad and they have to put up with it. But I think as I've sort of grown as a writer and a person, like people do make mistakes and they put themselves first or they put other people too far first and it comes back to haunt them. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic in play and like how people relate to each other.
I do think that's one of the better themes in this book is like um connecting with people and how difficult it is sometimes.
Yeah, I
So
think sorry.
no, that's it.
Sorry, I could talk about this for ages. Again, community. I mean, the heart of this book and the heart of like kind of Kissen's warmth is like that sense of found family and that her family is something that she has rebuilt from scratch. And one of her driving forces is that no one should have to face the world alone. And so she kind of does end up semi-adopting people in general as being as she wants to essentially not impose, but create space for people to find community and sort of will genuinely shake them and be like, what are you doing? You have so much opportunity. You have so much like given to you on a plate, and like there is so much that you can do with this life because she like has her life with both hands. She's happy in who she is. She's happy in who she loves, and is confident with that. And so I think a really set character, a very determined character like her, kind of comes into conflict with people who are much more uncertain about where they stand in the world.
I think a lot of that feeling comes from like you include a lot of people with physical disabilities or one of Kissen's best friend is deaf and they all know sign language and like this was like oh my gosh finally someone has included a wheelchair in a fantasy setting.
I'm certainly not the first one, but
I know.
I I mean, so one of the things I found frustrating reading fantasy growing up is like as a queer woman, I found that even just as a woman, I would find that my equals in these books were often isolated. They were on their own. You just had like one woman, or they were threatened with assault or they were a comedic interlude, or they weren't very powerful, or they were, just magically powerful. And these things are all, great aspects of books, and it can be interpreted in different ways. But that kind of like either being isolated, ostracized, or fridged or killed off felt like just the generic expectation going into books. So I would go into fantasy books like really defensive and feeling like, oh, there's a woman, oh, she's going to be threatened with assault or rape. And oh, it's a queer person, oh, they're going to be threatened with assault or rape. Like, and it made me so sad and angry. And so in writing this book, I wanted to write a book with community. I wanted to write a book where that was like it was more gender parity. There was like it's a world where it's a queer norm. But then also as I began writing the book, I and this experience at the beginning we've spoken about earlier is that sacrifice. And Kissen needs to escape from a really inescapable situation. And I was working on the lore of the gods and how gods like different prayers or different sacrifices would kind of tot up the tally. So, a prayer or an offering of money or something that you love is pretty good, but an offering of flesh, blood, or bone is like top level offering for a big wish. And so in the book, at the beginning, like her leg is sacrificed to give her safety from the people who are trying to sacrifice her. Um, and so reading that and well, writing that, I realized I was writing a disabled character, and I needed to do that respect and do that justice as I'm not disabled myself. And so I read a lot of writing by disabled readers and disabled communities, of which there's such a huge, brilliant variety, especially now on Book Talk, really visible, and sort of advocating for themselves, advocating for what they read and what they write. And so I read a lot of that, and what people were saying about what they saw in fantasy, the same things that I felt when reading fantasy is if you were disabled, you were alone, you were just tokenized, isolated, a tragic figure or a comedic backdrop. And I was like, this is the kind of stuff that I hate, like, and you're feeling it thrice fold. And so it was really important to me to ensure that Kissen, who is disabled, would have family and that she would have community and that she would be loved and she wouldn't be alone. And that her family, her sisters, so her Tele and Yatho, so her friends, would make space for each other. They would make it kind of, they would make space for each other's mobility aids or the way that they speak or the way they communicate. And there are other reasons why other people might learn sign in this world as well. And that it is a language in itself, just like learning French or Arabic in our world would be. And that it is something that kind of is polite to be able to speak with as well. And I learned sign language at school growing up, and then I really lost it as I left that first school. And so I'm just like, it is just another way to communicate and be polite, and it is a language, and there's so much that can come from it. So yeah, I kind of tried to build all these like different angers and frustrations into the book and to try and do them justice. And with Kissen's family to show that you can be disabled and in a fantasy world and excellent and loved and whole, and you don't need to be magically fixed, and you don't need to be kind of just on your own, like you are there. And that was really important to me to do that justice.
So in the beginning, it doesn't even feel like Kissen has any deformity or like she's not disabled in any way because she has a fake leg that works very well. It causes her some pain, but she just deals with it. And then she gets to her sister's house and she sits in her wheelchair, and you're like, oh, finally you can rest. I forgot.
It's like she's not made of steel. Like she is
Yeah.
incredibly determined. Like pain is part of her life. Like losing a limb is not a simple thing to experience. And I work with authenticity editors to talk about phantom pain and chronic pain and the pain of using a prosthesis. And a lot of those are really quite constant. And I've got friends who use wheelchairs, and they can stand. A lot of people who use wheelchairs as mobility aid can, but sitting down and being able to be like, oh, this is I am safe, I am home, like I can rest and I can like get around confidently. Like that's really important, like for people to feel like they have home. And so yeah, the Kissen has a wheelchair that she can get home and sit down and be like, oh, I'm home, thank God. What a relief. I think that's a lovely thing.
I thought it was so wonderful, and it was like such a moment of uh, I don't want to say weakness, but like relating for Kissen, who's been only tough and only brusque up until this point. And then she finally
Mm.
gets to like sit and she's like, oh, okay. And then her sisters are like, you know, you're kind of messing up a little, right?
Do you want some balm for your knee? Like, you should not have been walking on that leg, you absolute idiot, like kind of thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's also like Elo as well, like kind of has well, I suppose like going back to yeah, these people are real, and I think sometimes it's possible, especially in fantasy settings, to be dismissive of the impact this world can have on a person, especially in settings with war, which I mean, in reality, and in history are like mass disabling events. And Elo himself has chronic pain and PTSD, which are connected. It's a psychological connection. Um, like that, his experience coming through that war has been has been a disabling event, and it is for more than one person. And I think it's really kind of to show the sort of elements of the reality of what war can do to you, like mentally and physically, and that the world that Kissen exists in is respectful of people with disabilities, but it's still exhausting. Like she's still allowed to be tired, and she's still allowed to have use her leg both for her success, but also kind of like she can also suffer from the fact that she is in pain, like she is working on something that's not might be damaged or might be broken. And that's yeah, it's important to show the different aspects of that.
I just love these characters so much.
Me too. I think it's just existed in my head for so long, and I'm just like little babies.
One of my other, like, the most wonderful parts of this book is the gods and how they are created and how they are destroyed. And I love the mythology, or like the way they are created so much. um so
So, oh, sorry.
I was just gonna, how did you choose which gods to create, like what existed already, what didn't exist?
So I definitely there is precedent in writing gods that I created from human thought and emotion, and so definitely had inspiration from Terry Pratchett, which I grew up reading and is absolutely adore. And also American Gods by Neil Gaiman plays with this idea as well of like that relationship between humans and gods and faith and belief, and which I think is just like is a fascinating thing to build on. And then also with this kind of we're in an amazing era of like kind of retellings and reimaginings of Greek mythology, which as a lot of people I feel um, growing up in the West, like being like kind of Greek history nerds, of because I mean it's kind of been integral to our own history and our own literature. Is like a lot of like Shakespeare sort of adopted or approximated kind of like Greek mythology, and that was the idea of like highest education is to speak Latin and Greek, even though most of the philosophy and the mythology that we now have like was actually preserved through Baghdad and Islamic study, and then was like retranslated back into back into the West. So I love the sort of capriciousness of the gods and how awful they can be, and how yeah, having that great power doesn't necessarily mean you're always going to use it nicely. And so I played with a lot of these different ideas, and I wanted to create a pantheon that both felt um, new and fresh and different, but also grounded. So I definitely pulled on elements of like folklore, like Celtic folklore, and Norse mythology, Greek mythology, and different aspects of ideas that I've played with over a long period of time. So we have like a god of broken sandals, but we also have a god of white lies, and then we have a god of the wild hunt, or a god of fire, or a god of the sea. And so we have sort of different levels of godhood, and some of them are really small and really local. and sort of based around a specific area or shrine. And then others have become more, have traveled more, have become international, have many, many believers across different continents. And I love that. That's kind of the same in our own sort of socioeconomic history, that with trade and with um, sort of storytelling, we adopted and passed different gods around our world. And I think that's just really exciting.
I I think it's really fascinating because the way you describe it is like when a god is created is with such love. Um, in particular, Skedi is like watching the pilgrims send prayers and thanks to their gods, and he's like, if only I could have just a little bit of that love, right? And
Yeah.
he's manipulating people the whole time, and you're like, buddy.
But then he can't reveal himself, like he's illegal. So it's kind of like he's both, you can understand that desire to be loved and to have a home, which is something that he desperately wants, to have a shrine and to have followers. But then yeah, he is manipulative. I mean, he's a god of white lies. He has to, like, it's part of who he is. But then he has that moment where he's like manifesting that and it's like, oh, look, I'm doing amazing stuff. That's really cool. But then he starts to get a little bit too big for his boots. And I think that's, yeah, slippery slope for Skedi.
Yeah. I I just find it really interesting. I guess the gods in general. The first god that we come across, like a physical god, is when Kissen is killing the first god in the beginning of the book, and it's weak. People, it's a very local god, and she's like mad because not enough people love her or are willing to sacrifice for her.
Yeah. She's like a local god of a local river. And as the kind of the reason that Kissen's been summoned to kill her is because she has been withholding like food from like sort of stopping up the river. There's no fish coming down. There's no like kind of fresh water. She's like holding that up so she gets more sacrifices. And yeah, it's very, very cunning and very naughty.
But it's funny because she's the god of this one river, right? So I
Mhm.
would imagine that there's a river god, and then she is specifically of this river.
Exactly, yeah.
um, and she's so indignant when Kissen starts to like try and kill her,
So, excuse me, you walk into my house.
right?
I mean, who wouldn't be? I mean, you're a god, and someone comes along and says, mm-mm, no, you went too far. Like, I'm gonna hold you to account. And that's what I really wanted Kissen to be, is that she doesn't kind of break down just like random shrines that she comes across. Like, she gets paid for it. And she usually gets paid for it when a god has started to overstep their mark. I think Kissen does understand that as we must all do, like gods are built out of love and faith and are important to people. And I think there's one point where she's like, she says she doesn't like break the shrines of the poor just for fun. And I think that's like a really shows there is a seed in her that kind of understands where gods come from and where they can be important to people. But she feels like there's a line in the sand. And as soon as they cross that line, she's going to be waiting there with a big sword and be like, haha, my turn. So she kind of sees herself as like a defender of people, and that she's just kind of like there to put an end to gods when, and for her, she thinks it's a certainty they start to abuse their power and abuse their faithful.
Yeah. And it seems like um she doesn't destroy these small shrines that people have in their homes or like in their really small communities because they help those people or like they give faith to those people. And so
Hmm.
Kissen is just like the most empathetic while being the snarkiest.
She's an asshole, but she has that weak spot as well. And I think kind of like does part of her want to? Yeah, like she would if she had it her way, she'd just go around and be like, that shrine's gone, that shrine's gone, that god's gone. But she has to acknowledge that seed within her of like kind of she loves people more than she hates gods. And that's gonna come up in the next books, but she has to kind of like deal with that. conflict within her.
Well, even at the end, she has to figure out some things. So
Mm. She does figure out some things pretty fast.
yeah.
And yeah, I think some people have been, read and have been disappointed that like the book uh it isn't hateful towards gods or religion or organized religion. Um, because I mean, in my family there are all sorts. I mean, my close family are believe one thing, my grandparents at one side are Irish Catholic, at the other side are Jewish, like kind of there's so many different faiths that are vital and important to people. I've got so many friends for whom their faith is their is their haven and is their anchor and the anchor of their community. For and I don't think that is something that is terrible, but I also think that faith can be used in different ways. I think it can be used beautifully to create community and to create hope and create love, but it also can be misused and to isolate and to harm. And I think there are so many different facets of that, and it comes with human behavior and what we believe and want to believe and how we use that power as well. So yeah, I think, yeah, writing Godkiller, I was like, I can't just write this from one perspective of someone who hates gods. Like, it's complicated, and it always will be complicated.
Yeah. I I really love the dynamics that you've created here. So I'm really excited for book 2 now.
Thank you. Me too. It started, a couple of samples went out in the UK last week, and it was
Yeah.
really exciting. But people are looking forward to this. I feel really honoured that people have read and loved book one and want to pick up the world again and follow these characters. It just gets me really really emotional. I feel immensely privileged to be able to put this book out in the world and for people to pick it up and like it. I'm so excited for it to come out in the US, though mildly terrified. So it's out on September the 12th, and I'm like, but we'll
So,
see.
okay. Did this book get released earlier this year?
So in the UK, it did.
Okay.
It came out in January, on January the 18th in the UK. And I hadn't actually sold to the US at that point. So it had gone out on sub, but no publishers had picked it up, which is, fair enough. But when it was released in the UK, it went straight to number one, and it's sort of continued to be a really well-selling book. And the US, I think, kind of saw it and went, "Oh, actually, this could be good," and offered to buy it and to publish it overseas. And yeah, I was completely overjoyed. So that's the reason for the delay between January and now. But they have turned that around in record time. It's been an immense work on like the publishing team and the marketing team and the publicity team to like kind of bring this all together so quickly. And yeah, I'm really, really lucky.
Well, I'm very happy for you and also happy for me that I got to read it.
Thank you. I'm so glad you did. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Just feels
Uh,
like really special to me.
when is book 2 out then?
So it's out in the UK on February 15th, and it's out in the US in March. So not so long away between the two. It'll just be a month different. So that's the current aim at the moment. I need to find out what date it is in March. I've been told, I've just forgotten. But yeah, so out in February and March, and it's got a beautiful cover that I'm not allowed to reveal yet. But we'll start with this one. New
I
color
mean,
scheme,
it's perfect. And it's called Sunbringer, right?
Sunbringer, yeah.
Okay.
Dialing it up a notch.
Hmm. And it does keep the same cast of characters, right?
Yes,
Okay.
but we do have one new point of view.
Okay. Perfect.
But it's about the same length, one new point of view, and some characters you may not expect. But I will tell you
Great
no
to
more.
It's got to be so difficult talking about book one just after you've finished book two, and you're like, let's talk about book two.
I mean, I will never tire of talking about book one. But yeah, I mean, I've only just put the final I full stop on the line edit. So there's another edit to come still. So some things might change, but very little at this stage. So yeah, it's been really, really fun to write, really interesting to edit and to move it forward. So I'm so excited to see what people think and how many people will be desperately angry with me.
Ooh,
I
why? What did you do?
think someone said like, "What's going to happen to all the characters?" And I said, "I'm going to make them worse." There
Yeah,
you go. You're going to make them all worse.
as long as they don't die right away, I'm fine, I guess.
We'll see. I'll do my best.
Well, thank you so much, Hannah, for talking to me.
Thank you so much for listening to me ramble on Dakota. It was lovely to meet you.
It was lovely meeting you too, and I'm sorry about the wait at the beginning. That was
Oh, don't
me.
worry at all.
Time zones are weird.
Time zones are weird. I was just sitting here reading a great book, so I was just, yeah, I was happy as Larry.
Well, Godkiller is out in September and Sunbringer is out in March, and I can't wait. I'm so excited to see the full copy of Godkiller because I only have the arc right now. So excited.
Thank you so much. Yeah, can't wait for it to reach people.
Well, pick up Godkiller and pre-order Sunbringer. I'm gonna go pre-order it now. So
Thank you.
have a great day.